Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Athletic School podcast. Today, I do have a guest speaker, Rob Pallante. It's been a while since I have a guest speaker. So, Rob, thanks for reaching out and thanks for being willing to do this on a Sunday morning. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely, Igor. I saw your post and I thought what a great opportunity to introduce myself to another like-minded individual and share conversation around mindset and mental performance.
100%. So, Rob, just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your work. For people that maybe don't follow you on social media yet
Sure.
and don't are not super familiar with what you do. Just tell us a little bit about your work and how you helping athletes with the mental game. This episode is sponsored by CaliforniaAvocadosDirect.com, delivering rich, creamy, hand-picked avocados straight from a family farm in Escondido, California, to your door. No middleman, no mass storage, just farm fresh quality you can taste and trust. Packed with healthy fats, potassium, and fiber, it's the kind of real fuel high performance need, whether you're grinding on the field or recovering from it. Use the code The Athletic School for 10% off of your first box at CaliforniaAvocadosDirect.com.
Absolutely. So today I work as a mental performance coach. My background that got me here, I'll give you the 35,000 foot view. Grew up in Toronto, Ontario, up in Canada. So like a lot of Canadian boys, I followed. I got involved in hockey. My father actually played at a pretty high level. Both my brother and I played the sport. We also played soccer as well. And at about 14 years old, I had to make a decision between the two sports, and I followed the hockey path. I was very fortunate to get drafted into the Ontario Hockey League, pretty high, 52nd overall. I played a year of junior, and then I was awarded a scholarship. I had a number of schools that I could choose from. I wound up going to Michigan Tech University, where my father was a legacy there. He had played hockey and football at Michigan Tech. Um, After that, I pursued playing hockey as a pro. I played a little bit in the minor leagues, and then eventually got into the corporate world where I spent about 20 years in sales, business development, leadership development. And it wasn't until about 2015 when I had a major crisis in my life where I was hit on my motorcycle and I spent 40 days in the hospital fighting for my life. I had 8 surgeries. Without going into all of the details, eventually I came out of that with this understanding or this feeling of wanting to go back into sport to try and give back. When I quit the game, there was a lot of things that happened to me, or that I thought was being directed towards me. A lot of reasons why and finger pointing on why my career didn't make it to the NHL, and it had nothing to do with talent. So when I laid in the hospital bed, I looked back and I said, I had to own all of the decisions that I had made up until that point. Coming out of that, I spent about 2 years of rehab working back on my body, but really trying to make a connection between the mind and the body. And I became fascinated with it. I started to take mental performance uh, um, courses, did a ton of reading, and that started my journey back to getting back involved in sports, reaching back out into the sports community, and now I it's been since 2019 when I launched my program, and I've had an opportunity to work with a couple of hundred athletes to this point from many different sports. There's a heavy emphasis on hockey because it's the one that I know the most. But I've worked with football players, a few soccer players, and so now this is what I do for a living, and I enjoy it. It's an opportunity to give back. I look at myself as a servant leader, trying to work with young athletes to help them fill in the gaps of that connection between the mind and the body that I didn't get when I was that age.
100%. And I love how, like, sometimes we go through these phases in life and something happens to us that makes us look back and change the path of our lives. Um and I love how you decided to come back to sports to help other people, right? So maybe they don't have to go through a car accident, go through something like that, or a bad injury to figure out that, like, you know what, let me do actually something that I truly love or I truly enjoy. So thanks for sharing that. That's awesome. And, and I hope at the end of the day, we can help people, kind of like define that mindset before they get to the point that, they are like desperate and they have to do something else with their lives just because they're lost.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the key now. I think that today's athletes are starting to recognize, not that they didn't, and I'm a little older than you. I'm closer to 60 than I am to 50 now. So back in my time, when you were struggling, or you were wondering, why am I not playing in certain roles, or how come I got cut, or instead of figuring the connection between the mind and the body, because it's usually not a talent issue, it's a mental issue. But what we did back then was, there was really not a lot of people to talk to. We would
Mhm.
ask the coach, what do I need to do? And you get the typical answer of, be patient, keep working hard. So you start throwing effort into um, more reps, working harder on your body, pushing yourself, but you're not making that mental connection and preparing yourself for what happens. How you respond becomes more important than what you do.
Mhm.
And putting less emphasis on what I call focusing on outcomes, and more emphasis on process. And I didn't
Mhm.
get that message until later in life.
I bet. And, I think nowadays it's almost like we are in the other far end where, oh, the outcome doesn't matter at all. And then I think it's like back then you were like, you gotta push through and who cares about your emotions? And now, like, oh no, now your emotions are the main priority. And I feel like it's a interesting topic because for me, I think we have to kind of like find a balance and know ourselves, to truly understand who we are and what works best for us. But before we get to that, let's lay some like a foundation here, let's talk about mindset. How would you describe a mindset? What's a good mindset?
So I think a lot of people confuse mindset with being positive all the time.
Hmm.
And I don't believe that as a competitive athlete, you need to be the, hey, everything's great, let's go. I think, what happens if you take that mindset is, you lose that competitiveness. Whether it's soccer, hockey, football, whatever sport it is, you have to have a level. You have to be able to compete at a high level. I call it, being able to respond under pressure and on demand. And so, um, mindset is how you interpret a particular situation, but more importantly, how you respond to it, and being able to take that moment between um, the interaction of the activity and the response time, and choosing, are you choosing a behavior, or are you choosing an emotion, as you would say. And I
Hmm.
believe that choosing the emotion moves you further away from that end goal, whereas if you choose the behavior, it's going to help you take that step closer to what that outcome is, ultimately, that you don't control but you can influence. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of athletes confuse that mindset with mood, and they're two different things.
Well, 100%. And, but how do we do that? How do we don't focus on the emotion? And I made a video yesterday because I went on a run and it was like 6 p.m. and I absolutely hate going on a run late like that. But, I had to get the work done. Like, what do you tell your athletes
Yeah.
in order to make that happen? What you just told me.
Well, I think you just used a great example. You went for a run. You knew you had to do it. You
Hmm.
hated doing it, and mindset isn't saying, "Hey, I love running." You can hate what you're doing, right? I did not like running, but it's being able to show up in the details. You know how you talk to yourself, the things you tell yourself. You start to create um, rituals and routines that you just do, right? Obviously, our brain wants to take us to a place that's comfortable all the time. It's always in that mode of trying to protect. And when you step outside of that comfort zone, like you did, going, it's 6 p.m., I got to go run, 5 or 6K or whatever it is that you ran, God bless you. It's now you taking control of your mind over what your body or your brain is telling you, right? Because your
Mhm.
brain wants to protect you. Now you're stepping outside of that, and it's doing the things you promised yourself that you would do when you don't feel like doing them.
So you mentioned that mindset is not only about thinking positive, and we know how powerful our mindsets can be. But why there are so many athletes out there that still struggle with the mental game?
Well, it's a great question. I think if I could bottle that and sell it, we would make a ton of money, right? And I think this is
100.
where individuals like yourself and I were like-minded. We start to see that there's an opportunity here to start to work on developing that. And I think the younger we can start to interact with athletes, and I'm not talking well, I mean, if you go back to the primary years, 7 to 9, that's where parents can start to influence that, right? That those young kids that are up to 7, 8, 9 years old, those first few years are your imprint years. That's where you're just like a sponge absorbing all of this. So any parents that are listening that have young kids, this is where you can start to change that the future of your kid, but by the way that you're talking to them, because they're just listening to everything. When they start to question things, where we can start to get into our mindset is, instead of telling ourselves that if I do it once, it'll change things. You have to start to create the habits and routines around the behaviors that are going to move you closer to those goals, right? So I focus on three key areas when I'm working with an athlete. So the first thing is, I want to have them define their identity, and a lot of that might be changing their belief system based on those imprint years that I talked about earlier, right? A lot of athletes associate who they are with the jersey they're wearing, the sport that they play, and that's not who they are. So I try and separate the person from the player initially, so that they understand that I can be both, and who I am at home doesn't necessarily mean who I am, in the rink, on the pitch, in the field. And when you start to define what those core values are of a person, and you create that strong baseline for them, that foundation, they can go back to those as they're moving through sport and then moving through life. And it's all based on confidence, which comes from preparation.
Mhm.
So it's doing those hard things like you did, going out for a run. How did you feel after you came back from the run?
It was good. After I was done, it was good.
It
I
was
was
good.
tired, but it was good.
You
Yeah.
were tired, but you felt good about doing it, right?
Mhm.
And it's pushing yourself to do that, and eliminating the excuses, knowing that the end goal is, for you now, young family, it's being healthy, setting an example, being able to show up for your family, being able to make decisions that are going to positively influence yourself and your family. And if you've got young children, they're watching, and they're watching what dad does, right?
Mhm.
So I believe all of that comes into play. It's my long way of going around, how do we change that? It's a long answer that starts
Right.
real early. It's not to saying that you can't affect it, at a later stage, but it's making up your mind that you need that that help.
Do you think that that's a process that we go through life and it's always changing? Because I I just feel like, for example, if you are working with an athlete, um, is there such a thing as graduating from a mental performance program with you, or is it something that there's always something going on, kind of thing?
There's always something going on. Look, we're human beings. We're managing emotions, thoughts, feelings, right? They say the average human being, a human person, will have between 40 and 60,000 thoughts a day, right? So imagine we have all these thoughts that are coming in. Each one of them is based on an experience, how we respond. The emotions are attached to a lot of those thoughts, either something that just happened or something that's happened in the past. And then we have our reticular activating system, which kicks in and says, this is how I felt during that experience, and it reminds me of that. And that's what triggers our emotion. Being able to control that is going to be so important. moving forward. But also, if I refer back to Carol Dweck, having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And if
Mhm.
we're stuck in our old beliefs, you're not going to allow yourself to have that growth mindset. So to your point, is there a graduation? I don't think there's ever a graduation. I
Mhm.
have a very good friend of mine, a mentor, who once said to me, he goes, "You never arrive, you're always becoming." And if you approach everything with that mentality and with that growth mindset, knowing that you're never actually going to achieve it, but you have to continue to strive for it, I think that will allow you to adapt in those moments that you're going to need to the most. And that's typically when adversity comes, right? When everything is going well, that's great. We're comfortable. We're in a place. Things are going well. Money's coming in. We're playing we're getting all of the playing time that we want. The coaches love us. But then all of a sudden, adversity comes in and strikes. And now it's like, how do you respond to that? Well, if you haven't already practiced or thought about using, things like what's your body language, where's your focus, what's your self-talk, and being able to become more self-aware of those emotions, those feelings in those moments, then you're just going to continue to set yourself up for failure.
Mhm. What's the main thing that you see athletes doing it wrong or, making mistakes when it comes to their mindset?
I think they treat it like a pep talk. Well, if I just tell myself everything's going to be okay, I got this, and you only do it once in that moment, I kind of like relate it to motivation versus inspiration,
Mhm.
right? Motivation, we were talking offline how we have this. We each share an Italian background. Motivation's like a shot of espresso, right? There it
Yeah.
is. Boom! I take my espresso. I'm good to go for the moment. Inspiration is attaching yourself to a greater good, something bigger than yourself, that you every day you wake up, and for you it could be your family. Now
Mhm.
you're at a stage where, okay, maybe the dream of playing pro in the MLS or over in Europe is over. You still enjoy the game, but you've got a bigger purpose now, and that's your family, and that's your inspiration. What wouldn't you do to make sure that your family has a better life? Well, the same thing is for an athlete, depending on what stage they're at, finding what that inspiration is, why they get up, and that takes, usually when I'm working with an athlete, it takes a little bit of uncovering. We got to peel back the layers.
Mhm.
I ask them why they play the game. The first thing most athletes say is, "Well, I love it." Great. Why? you know and then when you dig into their past, well, you know what, I came from a family, and my father left, or whatever the situation is, and I don't want my mother or my siblings to struggle, and I want to be able to play this game so that I can earn enough money to take care of them. Well, that's bigger than a purpose for yourself.
That makes sense. Um, I see a lot of people talking about discipline against motivation, and I love how you added inspiration. Where do you think discipline comes in?
Discipline comes into what we were talking about earlier. That's doing the things you don't want to do when you have to do them, and just accepting it. um, I have a lot of connections, and I'll go back to the hockey world now. A friend of mine, a guy that I played college hockey with, is the assistant coach with the Winnipeg Jets in the NHL, and he's been around a number of NHL teams. And he said young athletes that figure it out are the ones that know that they can work hard and have fun at the same time. And it's a lot of it comes down to how you reframe things. Like, let's say in hockey, it might be doing what I'll call conditioning skating, or what hockey players refer to as bag skates, right? Soccer players, it might be running the lines,
Mhm.
and are you doing it knowing that this is going to make me better, and this is part of what I have to do, and it's not punishment? And it's we take those thoughts that we have, and we reframe them, or I call flip the switch, into something that you can use, that's going to help you move closer to that end goal. If I tell myself I'm doing this, it sucks, but I'm going to do it with a smile on my face, because I know this is what I have to do to get to
Mhm.
that goal, to make the money, to help my family and give them a better life. Or are you taking the attitude that this sucks, it hurts, I really don't want to do it, why am I being punished? The paths are completely different.
Yeah, I love that, and I like stoicism a lot. And
Oh,
one of the main ideas that they talk about is that everything is neutral, right?
yes,
And it's about how we see those things. Running is just running. It's up to you to make it feel good or feel bad. Feel as a punishment, or like you said, feel as something that will make me play better tomorrow. So I think like we were talking about, it's a learning process, and honestly I forget about that a lot of times.
yeah,
Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I just hate doing this.
yeah.
But
Now think
again,
about the words you use when you tell yourself that, right? Now you're telling yourself, I hate doing this. So remember, your body is always listening. And so we have to be very, very careful about the words we use. If you're into Stoicism, you know that words are like spells. That's why it's
hmm
called spelling, right? So
yeah.
when we use words like hate, we're telling our body. So, our mind and our body need to be aligned. And if our mind and our body are not aligned, then you're operating from the past or the future. And I
hmm
call this the floating head syndrome, and it's exactly what you're talking about. So choosing our words is so important. Not only how we think about them, but when we speak them, they have a 6 or 7 times greater effect on the outcome. And so, when you catch yourself saying, I hate, say, no, I don't hate, I get to.
hmm
And that self-awareness starts to change the way you behave, because your body doesn't know the difference, right? You say hate, now your body's going to go, I don't like doing this, so I'm going to go into protect mode, which means now as an athlete, what happens? You start to play safe, you second guess, you slow down, your reaction time isn't quite as quick. Whereas you tell yourself, I get to, your body's going to respond differently. Now you learn to be in the moment rather than operating from the past or the future.
yeah, I love that idea. Uh, Many years ago I read a book from a Brazilian author that worked with Ayrton Senna, the Formula One driver.
Oh yeah,
And the main idea on the book was like, your brain is dumb because it doesn't know what's the reality and what's not reality. So whatever you tell your brain, it's going to believe you.
yeah.
So just like you said, it's our words have power. Our brain is always going to believe us at the end of the day. So
It's like, if I say to you, Igor, don't think of pink elephants. The first thing you think about is even though you said don't think about it, right?
Mhm.
And if you think, and I use this example, it's like, if I'm working with a golfer and they're in the tee box and they're looking down the fairway and there's water on the right and there's sand on the left, and they tell themselves, don't hit the water, don't hit the water. Where do you think the ball is going to wind up? In the water. Whereas they focus down the fairway, almost to the point where I want them to pick out a blade of grass on the fairway that they can see in their mind. Now that becomes the target. The water and the sand become irrelevant because they're
Mhm.
not being processed in the mind. But as soon as you bring those into play, now they become options.
Yep. I saw you talking about 5 mental hacks for hockey players, but I'm assuming they can probably be applicable to other players as well. What are those 5 mental hacks?
So I talk about pre-shift routine. So, being able to use a self-talk reframe. So a little reset between shifts. Recognize what you've done on the last shift. Reset yourself through breath and a quick wide gaze, or it's called quiet eye visualization, and then refocus. So, what do I need to do next? And I use this acronym WIN. What's important next? That helps you focus on letting go of the past, focusing on what's next. The second part is a self-talk reframe. So swap out things like "don't mess up" for "I make plays." I'm a strong skater. I have them incorporate cue words. Little 1 or 2 word sentences that they tell themselves going out into that next shift. So move your feet, get puck touches, make body contact. Those are powerful, and you can use them in any situation as part of your reframe and your self-talk. I'll use things like a mistake flush. So a physical gesture that might help you immediately bring yourself back into the moment. So tapping the boards, tap your shin pads, and tell yourself a squirt of water in your face, letting go of that. And then
Mhm.
finally is an identity statement. So who are you as a player? I'm strong, I'm fast, I'm smart. Repeating those things in between or before a shift will help you maintain that focus and being in the moment, which we as athletes need to be. Hockey, soccer, basketball, they're chaotic sports. There's a lot of players moving in a lot of different directions, a lot of things happening. When we start to lose focus of being in the moment, now we're operating from a past tense or a present tense. And what I've learned is that the past doesn't exist anymore and we can't change it, and the future is not here. So all you
Mhm.
have is right here, right now. So when you learn to ground yourself in that moment using those 5 things, so pre-shift routine, self-talk, reframe, process words, mistake flush, and an identity statement, you can start to better allow yourself to perform at the highest level.
I love that. I think that's very, very useful. I talk to a lot of in the podcast. I've mentioned some of those things, and I think if I knew those things before when I was playing,
Right?
um, maybe I would have gone to the MLS. Who knows? But
Listen,
like you
everything
said, I
happens for
think
the reason, right?
yeah, of course, of course. I wouldn't be here talking to you today for sure. So
Right.
um, you talked a lot about habits, and I see you talking a lot about confidence. Where does confidence comes in? Does it come from habits?
Good question. Um, First of all, I like to say, like, confidence is something that you need to build and work on. It's like a skill, right? Confidence needs to be earned. It's not given, right?
Mhm.
And it comes from doing hard things repeatedly. When you do hard things repeatedly, you have to open up your mind. I'll go back to that growth mindset. You're not going to be very good at the beginning, and you have to accept that I might look like a fool. I don't know what I'm doing. This isn't the result isn't going to be very good, but I'm going to stick to it and do it over and over and over again, right? When you do that, you start to stack evidence of success. And when you start to stack that evidence of success, now you're starting to create an ideal of, if I continue doing this, I'm only going to get better. And we know that confidence comes from preparation, right? You have to stop waiting to feel ready, and you have to be able to act your way into confidence. It's not the other way around, right? And that consistency will help build that identity of who you are. And then you'll be able to add that into your identity of, I don't care how I look or if the result isn't what I want, I'm going to continue to work at it until I get better at it.
Yeah, no, I like that. And you mentioned a little bit before, and that's something that I truly believed in, something that I've tried to work on more often, which is becoming that person before I have that, right? So we try to um in terms of athletes, we want to play, we want to be the starter, we want to play for that team, and we want to have x amount of money and things like that. And something that I've learned a lot from reading and meditating a lot on, like, the work of Joe Dispenza. I'm not sure if you're familiar
Yeah,
with
yeah,
him.
of course. Yeah,
um,
yeah,
but that's the main thing. You have to become before you get there. So it's not necessarily about the outcome. You should be delusional if you can, as much as you can,
yeah,
with whatever result you want, and
yeah.
then you have to become that person. You don't have to um, work towards that thing. Once you become that person, those things will come to you right away. So creating the athletic school has been a long journey. Reaching 100 episodes has taken consistency, grit, and a lot of passion. Having incredible guests share their story has been a true pleasure. But now, I want to ask you for your help. If you haven't already, please follow the show on whatever platform you're listening from. It really helps me a lot. And I promise you this: I'll continue to bring on the best guest speakers I can, and I'll do my very best to share content that helps you grow, not just as an athlete, but as a person on and off the field. I will study, I will read, and research relentless for ways to help you. And I'll share everything I learned right here.
Yeah. If you think about fighters, okay, they're a good example of this. There's example in all sports, but Mike Tyson and Conor McGregor, they come to mind when I think about what you're talking about. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they had to be the champion before they became the champion. How
Mm-hmm.
you walk, how you talk, how you show up, what time you wake up. Are you creating the habits and routines of a champion, and are you living them every day without evidence? And that's the hard part sometimes. You might not always see it happening, but you have to believe in your mind that you are, and you are that person, and show up as if you are that person every day without having the evidence sometimes that it's working. And
Mm-hmm.
that's difficult to do. Very difficult.
For sure. And you know, we talked you mentioned how many thoughts we have in a day, and it made me think a lot about overthinking because you know, whenever I'm thinking about all those things, and I'm trying to become that person, and sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, am I being crazy because I'm walking like I have $1 million in my pocket even though I don't. But so I guess my question is, how can we help athletes not overthink in a daily basis, but especially in games, because I feel like that's when you mention, like, when you start overthinking, that's when you second guess a pass that you were gonna make, and then now it's too late. They already took the ball from you and they score a goal. How can we help those athletes to not overthink in games or in a daily basis in general?
It's a great question, and I deal with overthinking quite a bit. It's a commonality in a lot of athletes, especially the ones who tend to be very hard on themselves, right? Because you're
Hmm.
analyzing so many things. Just remember, I go back to overthinking is your brain trying to protect you, right? Um, it's not a weakness, but it kills instinct. So if you're in a routine where you're in a growth mindset and you're working on developing the skills over and over and over again, eventually you're going to see the evidence of that. And it would be like if I said to you, "Hey, Igor, do you know how to run and dribble a ball?" Well, you could run on the field and do that without thinking because now your
Hmm.
head's up, you're scanning, you're looking for what's going on. But take yourself back to when you first learned how to walk and kick a ball. Were you good at it? No, right? It took a lot of practice. So what you're doing is you're creating those neural pathways now for your body to just take over. And when we overthink, we start to block those neural pathways. That's our conscious mind taking over from our subconscious. And sometimes we have to allow our subconscious to just go out and execute because you can't think and execute at the same time. Because if you start thinking, you execute late, right? So we have to learn to play free. And playing free means trust your training. Trusting your training means you have confidence because you've prepared properly. And
Hmm.
so the best tool is just, I think, to shrink down the moments into next shift, next play, next pass, which goes back to everything is all related. That goes back to what's important next. So I use that acronym a lot. Win. What's
Hmm.
important next? Okay, so you might be on the pitch and you got stripped of the ball. Well, do you stand there, throw your arms in the air, and go, "Oh shit"? Or do you immediately react and go, "I need to get back into a defensive position. I need to track down the player with the ball. I need to get myself back in a position getting ready to strike and move the ball upfield," depending on what position you're in. So
Hmm.
it's understanding that what happens next is most important. And so when you're learning to play in the moment like that, you stop overthinking, you trust your training, and you allow your confidence and all the training that you've done to take over. You're executing and not thinking.
Hmm. Love that. You talked about identity, and that's something that I kind of talked about in the podcast a little bit, and that's something that I've learned in trying to dive deep into it. I think we know that athletes, um, they tie their identity to their performance, right? So if I'm not playing good, I'm a horrible player. If I'm playing very well, the results are coming to me, then I'm a very good player. Um, why does that happen, and why, and how can we change that so we are not just, you know, slaves of the results that we're having?
But you use the word results, and that's the biggest challenge, right? We tie our identity to results. You know, if I score 50 goals, I'm a great player.
Mhm.
Well, there's a lot of great players that don't score 50 goals, right? So when we learn that our identity, so that goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning, developing a foundation of core values of who you are as a person. Now, when you step into a performance setting, you have these core values to go and draw from. You know, when you watch great athletes and they perform maybe below the standard that has been set for them by social media or television or expectations from the public. Excuse me, let's use Tiger Woods as an example, or a golfer who maybe doesn't have a great round, and they ask him, hey, it looks like that wasn't the best round that you had, you missed some shots here and there. The public's focusing on the negative. Listen to the way they talk. Well, actually, if you go back to the seventh hole, I thought I hit a really good drive there. I chipped up on the green. I putted well. Yeah, I need to work on. I need to go back to the range and maybe work on my short game a little bit. But the way they talk to themselves is they go back to their strengths. Um, they still believe that they are the best in the world. They're not defined by their mistakes, which a lot of us do, which is another thing that I wish I would have learned when I was younger. We can't let mistakes define us. And you have to think about, how do I respond after that mistake? The great ones don't perform at the highest level all of the time. They perform at the highest level the majority of the time. And they learn how to balance, as you said earlier, that neutral mindset, come
Mhm.
back to neutral. What do I need to do here? Enjoy the highs, recognize the lows, but always come back to a neutral mindset. And when you're able to perform to that kind of identity versus an ability identity, I think now you're able to raise the ceiling of who you are. And you can ask yourself on a daily basis what am I doing right now that is something that, a top level athlete would do? So when I'm building out these identity blueprints with my athletes, I have them recognize who's somebody that you look up to, especially the younger athletes, right? Okay, in this situation where you made a mistake, what would they do? How would they react? How would they respond? So it gets them out of the making mistake, because everybody makes mistakes, and they start to build responses around what their idol might do, or what that character of who they want to be would do. And I love the idea that you said, I'm walking around like I have $1 million in my pocket when I don't. But you have to create that sense of identity of who you want to be, and you have to show up as that person. And I'll often ask athletes, hey, you know, if you were a first round draft pick, how would you show up for practice? Well, I would do that. And I would say, well, what's stopping you from doing that?
Yeah.
This. Because you're telling yourself, well, I'm not a first rounder. Is that going to help you perform better? No, it's not. But if you show up trying to be the best version of yourself every day and act as if you were, now you start
Yep.
to build in the discipline, you build in the mindset, and you create that identity of that version of yourself that you need to be effective on the field of play.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think another important thing is giving ourselves some grace as well, because I feel like we were talking early, it's a learning process, and it is simply a process, right? It's We're not gonna be able to, wake up the next day and have all those things set in place. Like, you have to put in the work, and you have to do all those little things that we're talking about. um Otherwise, things doesn't work, and it's okay sometimes when, we're having a harder time, but it's part of the process.
For sure. There's all these
Um,
different rules in the world. And there's this one called rule of a thirds, and especially for an athlete, a third of the time you're going to exceed the expectations of where you
mhm,
play. Another third of the time you're going to play at the level of the expectations that you have created, and another third of the time are going to be below that. And when you learn to accept that and not tie your identity to the highs and lows, I think that's when you're going to be able to show up and perform, because you understand that, 100% today it might be here, tomorrow based on sleep, nutrition, your body's conditioning, all those things. It might be your 100% tomorrow might be here. Okay, so what percentage of this 100% am I showing up at for this day?
mhm.
And we know that that's going to fluctuate, and that's just part of life.
Okay, so now I want us to be able to create the perfect mindset, routine, whatever we want to call it, for a game day. So I have like four things that I wanted to tell you, and then I want you to tell me like first thing that comes in mind that that person should do. So the game day, what should that person do the night before?
Night before, well, so I would start with our phones, because we're all addicted to these things.
Mm-hmm.
Put your phone down at 30 minutes to an hour before you go to sleep. If the game, depending what time the game is, make sure that you're getting, between 7, 9 hours of sleep. So you're going to bed accordingly, turning your phone off. Um, you know, I would say that make sure that when you wake up, so you're talking just the night before right now, because
Yeah,
I
for
don't know.
now, for now.
I believe it's all cyclical. Okay, so the
Yeah.
night before is stretch, roll out, read before you go to bed. I always like to do a little bit of journaling, set some intentions before you go to sleep, how you want to sleep, how you want to wake up, and then put your head on your pillow and visualize as you're going to sleep, because we want to preempt our mind for sleep on the type of version of yourself you want to be the next day.
Okay. And what about 1 hour before the game?
Well, 1 hour before the game, at that point you should be locked in. And again, preparation starts from the night before through the morning, how you show up. At that point, now you're starting to, I would start to use some visualization. See yourself in situations on the field, on the rink, on the pitch, that you're performing at the level you want to. I would also start to include, and this might be a little bit advanced. So after you've used visualization and see success, start to see yourself in situations maybe that you're faced with some sort of adversity. Maybe it was a play from a game or two before where it didn't work out so well. See yourself in that situation and how you should have responded, right? Again, we're programming our body from our mind leading into that situation, accepting all outcomes and being prepared to respond immediately to those outcomes. How you respond to those situations is going to be so important, because that's the split second between moving yourself into a positive situation or a negative one. And being able to accept them all, I think, is so important. So, making sure that your body is limber that hour before, you've done your stretching, you're mentally prepared through visualization. And I would hope that you're hydrating properly also.
Yeah. And if there is anything important that you think they should be doing, what's something that they should do right before kickoff?
Right before kickoff. So here's a little uh, I don't call it a trick, but a strategy that I will use with players that are playing soccer or football. There's a white line on the field that
Mm-hmm.
you have to step over to get onto the field, right? So if you're in that starting lineup, as you step over that line, that's a trigger. Let go of who you are, the father, the son, the daughter, whatever it is. And now you have to step into that alter ego of yourself. And so I talk about, that identity, whether it's the person that you're looking up to, if you're a younger athlete, or if you're a pro athlete, what's that best version of yourself look like? How do you
Mm-hmm.
stay in the moment? As you step over that line, that's your cue now to become that version. Nothing else matters when you're on that field. So right before kickoff, you're saying those two or three cue words to yourself. If you're a soccer player, it would be move my feet, get some quick ball touches, and be situationally aware.
Love that. Okay, what's something they should do after they make their first mistake in the game?
Well, that's recognize, reset, and refocus. I call it my 3 R's, right?
Hmm.
Immediately recognize what happened. Okay, give it a name. All right, gave the ball away, made a bad pass. Got it. Reset, take a big deep breath, whether it's you're doing 2 sets of box breathing or an inhale breath where you're 4 or 5 seconds in and 6 to 8 seconds out. As you're doing that, I say in with the good air, out with the bad. Release that activity that just happened or that negative thought. And now you use quiet eye, wide gaze to reset yourself for what you need to do next.
Hmm.
And that's the
Love
reset.
it.
And then tap yourself, kick the dirt, do something
Hmm.
physical, and tell yourself, I got this.
Yeah, I love those little things. I think they make a huge difference. Um, my last question for you: if there's one thing that people that are listening to us should do tomorrow in order to actually change their mindset, what would it be?
I'll give you a real simple activity to do. All right. And it's basic, but everybody can use this immediately. Get a sheet of paper, draw a line down the middle of the page. On one side, put things I control. On the other side, put things I don't control. Write out the things that you control versus the things you don't control. So attitude, effort, work ethic, standards, those are some basics of things that you can control. Things you don't control: my teammates, competition, referees, pitch conditions, weather. Those are things you don't control, but they often occupy our mind. And once you've written out that list, take a pen and put a line through each one of them. I believe that um, there's positive things that happen when you put pen to paper. And now what you're doing is you're looking over to the other side of the page on the things you can control and circle one or two of those things that you can immediately improve on.
Awesome. I love that. Rob, is there a question that I didn't ask you that you kind of wish I had to?
Gosh, I mean, the mental performance space is becoming more and more popular, and I think that there's a lot more. We're just scratching the surface right now. Um, you know, I think that we've covered a broad spectrum of the topics. We've talked about confidence, we've talked about identity, we've talked about reset routines, controllables. There's a lot of information that we've covered today. I don't think there's one thing that stands out that you didn't ask that we couldn't
Mhm.
just, take any one of those topics and have a whole conversation about.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. Awesome. Well, I'm glad. Again, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate you reaching out and being willing to share all those things. I hope I didn't put you on a spot with any of those questions, but it didn't look like it. You're ready to go. So I really appreciate your time.
Igor, it was great to meet you and an honor to be on your podcast. And hopefully, I've delivered a little bit of value to somebody who might be listening. I think that there's a need for people like you and I out there. There's millions of athletes playing lots of different sports, and the more that we can create this like-minded community around mental health, mental support, mental performance, mental fitness, I think the more we can help spread that word and help not only just the athletes, but we if there's one question, we didn't talk about coaches and parents either, and that's another big area when
Yeah,
it
I
comes
think
to
that's a
development.
whole nother hour
That's a whole
podcast.
other. Those each of those are another podcast
100%. Yes, yes. Well, we definitely should do a second one then.
for sure, for sure. Anytime.